Good evening. We will now begin the webinar. Today is October 7th, 2021, and the time is 6:01 p.m. This webinar is being livecasted and recorded and will be available publicly on the MTA YouTube channel and the Central Business District Tolling Program project website at new.mta.info/project/CBDTP. By attending this virtual webinar, you are consenting to be recorded. Today's webinar will begin with opening remarks, followed by a presentation on the Central Business District Tolling Program, and then public comments. Only those who signed up to speak in advance will be able to give public comments. If you have joined the Zoom under a name that is different from the one you used when you signed up to speak, please identify yourself in the Q&A function with the name you used when you signed up. If you did not sign up to speak at today's webinar, you may sign up to speak at an upcoming webinar. To do so, please visit new.mta.info/project/CBDTP or call the public meeting hotline at 646-252-6777. Anyone who joined the Zoom may also use the Q&A function throughout today's webinar to ask questions or provide comments. CART captioning and American Sign Language interpreters are available at today's webinar. We'll now start with opening remarks from Dr. Allison Desereño, MTA's Deputy Chief Operating Officer.
Thank you. And thank you all for joining us this evening. We're excited to be engaging in public outreach with environmental justice communities for this historic project. And we thank you for taking the time to learn more and share with us your thoughts and comments. Joining me today are colleagues from New York State Department of Transportation and New York City Department of Transportation, as well as from the Federal Highway Administration, the lead federal agency for this project. We also have several individuals from our respective staffs here with us to listen to what you have to say. Your comments will be indexed and considered as part of the environmental assessment process. Environmental justice is an important consideration for the project. In today's webinar, we'll be spending time walking you through the project, the federal requirements to address environmental justice, and some of the tools we'll be using to engage with environmental justice communities, including webinars like the one this evening. We will be forming an environmental justice technical advisory group and a stakeholder working group to solicit additional input and feedback, and we'll have another set of webinar-style sessions focused on environmental justice communities later this fall. Through listening to your comments this evening and those in subsequent sessions, through discussions with members of the two groups, and through review of other comments from environmental justice communities, we hope to identify areas of particular concern for environmental justice communities, as well as how they might be addressed as appropriate. With that, let's jump right in as there's a lot to cover. Our agenda for today is to review the proposed program, the project purpose and need, discuss the project alternatives, provide an overview of the environmental assessment, and discuss and describe environmental justice considerations. We'll take a few moments to talk about the potential project effects and benefits, and then have a public comment session. So how did we get here? There's been a decade of congestion. Congestion in New York City has consistently ranked among the worst in the United States. Local bus speeds in Manhattan are on average 7% slower than citywide speeds. Between 2010 and 2018, travel speeds decreased by 23% in Manhattan's Central Business District, or CBD. And during that same period, multiple studies and panels explored how best to address congestion, including the 2008 New York City Traffic Congestion Mitigation Commission and the 2018 Fix New York City Advisory Panel. Many of them came back with the same concept of congestion pricing. There is also a need for sustainable funding source for transit. Prior to the pandemic, nearly 75% of trips into the Manhattan Central Business District were made using transit. 95% of trips to the Manhattan Central Business District by low-income populations are made using transit. MTA's subway system is over 100 years old and must be repaired and modernized to meet the region's needs. And funding transit modernization would improve service and attract commuters back to the system, further reducing congestion. In April 2019, the New York State Legislature passed the MTA Reform and Traffic Mobility Act. If approved by the Federal Highway Administration, this act would entail vehicles entering or remaining in the Manhattan Central Business District be tolled. Net revenues would be used for public transportation capital projects, with 80% devoted to New York City Transit, 10% to the Long Island Railroad, and 10% to Metro North. The toll rates will be determined by the Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority, or TBTA Board, informed by recommendations of the Traffic Mobility Review Board and after a public hearing. There are mandatory post-implementation reporting and evaluation requirements. To make sure everyone understands the area about which we're speaking, Central Business District tolling program boundary is south of and inclusive of 60th Street. Tolls would not apply to vehicles that are solely using the FDR Drive, Route 9A West Side Highway, including connections to the Hugh L. Carey Tunnel, or the Battery Park Underpass connecting the FDR Drive and Route 9A. The Federal Highway Administration will serve as the federal lead agency for environmental review. They are responsible for reviewing all of our analyses to confirm that they are complete, and they will also issue the environmental findings for the project. The Metropolitan Transportation Authority and its affiliate, the Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority, the New York State Department of Transportation, and the New York City Department of Transportation are serving as project sponsors. With respect to the project purpose and need, the project purpose is to reduce traffic congestion in the Manhattan Central Business District in a manner that will generate revenue for future transportation improvements, pursuant to acceptance into the FHWA's Value Pricing Pilot Program, or VPPP. The project would address the following needs: reduce vehicle congestion in the Manhattan Central Business District, and create a new local recurring funding source for MTA's capital projects. The following objectives further refine the project purpose. It would reduce daily vehicle miles traveled, or VMT, within the Manhattan Central Business District, reduce the number of vehicles entering the Manhattan Central Business District each day, create a funding source for capital improvements and generate sufficient annual net revenue to fund $15 billion for capital projects for the MTA Capital Program, and establish a tolling program consistent with the purposes underlying the New York State legislation entitled the MTA Reform and Traffic Mobility Act. So how is the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, and the project linked? NEPA requires federal agencies to assess and consider the environmental effects of their proposed actions prior to making a decision. The project would be implemented through the Federal Highway Administration's VPPP. As a federal program, that VPPP, or Value Pricing Pilot Program, is subject to NEPA. Federal Highway Administration is the lead agency and has determined that an environmental assessment with extensive outreach is the appropriate level of environmental documentation for this project. There are two project alternatives. There's the no action. There would be no Central Business District tolling program, no comprehensive plan to reduce congestion in the Central Business District, and no identified transit capital revenue stream. And there is the build or act alternative, where we would build a Central Business District tolling program. There would be new tolling infrastructure and toll system equipment, implementation of a tolling program, which would have multiple scenarios in the environmental assessment to assess and identify the range of effects, positive or negative. And there would be creation of a new revenue stream for investment in subways, buses, and rail. A little more detail on the proposed Central Business District tolling program alternative. As noted earlier, tolls would be charged for vehicles entering Manhattan south of and inclusive of 60th Street. Passenger vehicles would be charged once per day, and there are exemptions required by the MTA Reform and Traffic Mobility Act for qualifying vehicles transporting persons with disabilities, qualifying authorized emergency vehicles. Central Business District residents with gross adjusted incomes below $60,000 would be eligible for a tax credit. And there would be a Traffic Mobility Review Board that would be tasked with recommending to the TBTA board the toll structure, including but not limited to a plan for credits, discounts, and/or exemptions. Recommendations will be informed by a traffic study and must take into account multiple criteria, including the ability to generate revenue required, the impact on traffic patterns and volumes, public safety, air quality, among others. With respect to the toll, the environmental assessment is going to assess a range of scenarios and will be informed by robust public outreach. Studying multiple scenarios ensures that we understand the full range of potential environmental effects, including but not limited to congestion reduction, that different toll rates may cause. Toll rates will differ in each scenario depending upon the time of day, how someone pays, and the inclusion and extent of any credits, discounts, and/or exemptions beyond the two mandated by the enabling state legislation. Importantly, all else being equal, the more credits, discounts, and/or exemptions that are given, the higher the toll must be in order to meet the project's purpose, needs, and objectives. The modeling is not complete, and a final determination of the toll rates will not be made in the environmental assessment. Indeed, the toll rates, as noted previously, will ultimately be set by a vote of the TBTA board after the environmental review process and after the Traffic Mobility Review Board makes its recommendations. So importantly, these numbers I am about to share are for informational purposes and subject to change. With that said, to give you at least a sense of the range of potential toll rates, we anticipate that the Easy Pass peak period toll for automobiles will range from roughly $9 on the lower end to $23 on the higher end if many credits, exemptions, and/or discounts are provided. The range of potential toll rates for automobiles using tolls by mail would be higher, roughly $14 to $35 for the peak period, again, depending upon scenario. Off-peak and overnight toll ranges may be lower, and tolls for trucks and other vehicle types would have different ranges. With respect to the study areas, the broad study area for the environmental assessment includes a region of 28 counties throughout New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. There will also be more refined local study areas, including the Central Business District as defined by the MTA Reform and Traffic Mobility Act, in other words, 60th Street and Inclusive and South, with those other areas excluded as we described earlier, and neighborhoods near the Central Business District boundary where the project could have social, economic, or environmental effects. In terms of the key topics of the environmental assessment, this is not the full list, but we wanted to at least give you some sense of the kinds of things we'll be studying. Among them, as you can see, regional transportation, which is obvious. We'll be looking at highways and local intersections, commuter rail, subways, and buses, parking and pedestrian and bicyclists. We'll also be looking at social and economic considerations and conditions. We'll be looking at the visual resources, air quality, noise, and environmental justice, among others. Environmental justice is an important consideration for the project. Given that over 51% of the population within our study area lives in environmental justice communities, we're going to spend some time walking you through the federal requirements to address environmental justice and some of the tools we'll be using to engage with environmental justice communities. The term environmental justice refers collectively to minority and low-income populations within a project study area. In 1994, President Clinton issued Executive Order 12898, which requires federal agencies to consider the effects of their actions on environmental justice communities. In subsequent years, the U.S. Department of Transportation and the Federal Highway Administration have issued their own orders on environmental justice. Our environmental assessment must comply with all of these orders. The orders provide that Federal Highway Administration take the appropriate and necessary steps to identify and address disproportionately high and adverse effects of federal projects on the health or environment of minority and low-income populations to the greatest extent practicable and permitted by law. This slide shows the steps we'll be using in developing our environmental justice analysis. It is based on guidance developed by Federal Highway Administration and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. As you can see, we begin by identifying minority and low income or environmental justice populations and environmental justice communities. We engage in outreach with those communities, as you can see by the little picture on the right. We then determine whether the project would result in adverse effects on environmental justice populations or communities. We consider mitigations for those adverse effects of the project, as well as potentially offsetting benefits to the affected environmental justice populations. Again, there's outreach and engagement during that process. If the effects remain adverse after mitigation, we identify disproportionately high and adverse effects. If there are no disproportionately high and adverse effects, the evaluation is complete. If there are disproportionately high and adverse effects, we evaluate further mitigations or alternatives to avoid or reduce those effects. The Federal Highway Administration Environmental Justice Order provides specific definitions for minority and low-income populations. As you can see here, minority is defined by U.S. Department of Transportation and the Federal Highway Administration as a person who identifies as Black, Hispanic or Latino, Asian or Asian American, American Indian, Alaskan Native, Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander, or individuals identified as some other race by the U.S. Census. Low income is defined by United States Department of Transportation and Federal Highway Administration as a person whose household income is at or below the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services poverty guidelines. For a family of four, the 2018 U.S. Census Bureau poverty threshold was $25,750 for the study area. Based on the definitions in the previous slide, we have identified the environmental justice populations in our 28-county study area. As noted earlier, and as you can see in this table, over 51% of our study area population is considered minority, and over 12% is considered low income. I'll drill down on this data a little more in the next slide. This map shows the distribution in large concentrations of environmental justice populations throughout our study area. New York City has the highest concentration of minority and low-income population in our study area. Just under 70% of New York City's population, excluding the central business district, identifies as a member of a minority population, while over 18% are considered to be low income. The portions of New Jersey within our study area are comprised of roughly 47% minority populations, with 10% as low income. Roughly 37 to 40% of the population identifies as a minority population in each of the counties in the study area to the north of New York City, on Long Island, and in Connecticut, while the low-income population represents over 9%, about 6%, and over 10%, respectively. About 42% of the Manhattan Central Business District identifies as a minority population, while 13% are low income. Based on preliminary model results, 95% of low-income individuals travel to Manhattan Central Business District by transit, and 5% by vehicle in the morning peak period. When we consider the travel patterns for all commuters, low-income drivers account for under 4% of the total vehicle trips into the Manhattan Central Business District in the morning peak period, and low-income drivers represent less than 1% of the total trips into the Manhattan Central Business District in the morning peak period. We will continue to refine our data and assessment as we engage with members of environmental justice communities. In addition to the meetings like today, reviewing comments submitted on our website from email, by phone, and by mail, we'll be doing two other things to engage members of the environmental justice community. One is the Environmental Justice Technical Advisory Group that we'll be bringing together. This is a group of technical experts who have knowledge of environmental justice considerations and can share concerns drawn from throughout the study area. It will be comprised of community leaders, advocacy group representatives, and industry group representatives with specific interest in environmental justice considerations. They will help us identify concerns and mitigation if needed, and help to ensure information is circulated as widely as possible. This group is by invitation only, and the first meeting will convene in October 2021. Potential participants will be contacted in advance. A second group, an environmental justice stakeholder working group, will also be brought together. This is a group of interested members of the communities throughout the study area who would like to participate, again, beyond participating in the webinars by email, phone, or mail. This group is comprised of interested members of the community, and the purpose is to share concerns and request discussion on particular issues as appropriate. You may suggest yourself or someone else by visiting our website to complete a form, or by contacting us at 646-252-7440. The first meeting of this group will convene in November of 2021. And again, once we have all the names and contact information, participants will be contacted in advance. We're now going to review some of the potential effects of the project. Importantly, these effects are dependent upon scenario. The next slide will highlight some of the potential benefits. We'll begin with effects where there would be new tolling infrastructure and tolling system equipment. These are effects that result from installation of tolling infrastructure and equipment, or from changes in traffic patterns in the Manhattan Central Business District. For example, this includes temporary disruptions from construction during installation of infrastructure and equipment. Construction will have a limited duration, but it will generate some temporary truck traffic, dust, and emissions and noise. These activities will be similar to typical utility work or roadway construction. Visual changes where new equipment will be installed could also take place. In general, the tolling infrastructure and equipment will appear like other existing streetlight poles and traffic control infrastructure. Near the Queens Midtown Tunnel and Hugh Carey Tunnel, there will be some traffic diversions on the highway system that could result in more than a nominal increase in traffic. Preliminary analysis suggests this change in traffic would not occur on local roadways and would not adversely impact air quality and noise in the neighborhoods where the highways are located. However, we will be looking more closely at the neighborhoods adjacent to both sides of the tunnels. Preliminary analysis shows that new transit passengers will be spread throughout the system and will not overcrowd any particular route or line. In addition, preliminary analysis does not predict many people driving to transit stations near the Central Business District to begin their transit trip. Based on the preliminary analysis, the shift to transit would not notably change access to transit services, or pedestrian circulation near transit stations and hubs. With respect to changes in traffic in neighborhoods near the Manhattan Central Business District, in certain scenarios, traffic may divert from the East River bridges to the Queens Midtown Tunnel and Hugh Carey Tunnel. We will examine whether increases in traffic volumes would have the potential to affect neighborhoods near the two tunnels in Red Hook, Carroll Gardens, and Long Island City, where environmental justice populations are located. In terms of traffic that diverts around the Manhattan Central Business District to avoid tolls, some drivers currently travel through Manhattan, although their destination is elsewhere. For example, you may travel from New Jersey to Brooklyn or the Bronx by going through Manhattan. Preliminary modeling shows some of these drivers will change routes to avoid or pay lower tolls, with traffic potentially increasing on the Staten Island Expressway and parts of I-95 like the Cross Bronx Expressway. We will look closely at the extent of increases in parts of Staten Island, Brooklyn, Upper Manhattan, and the Bronx, and whether they could result in notable changes in traffic, air quality, or noise, as neighborhoods adjacent to many of these routes have been identified as environmental justice communities. With respect to tolls on low-income drivers coming to the Manhattan Central Business District from throughout the region, a direct effect of the project on residents of the Manhattan Central Business District who are part of an environmental justice population is that they will be charged a toll to drive into the Central Business District. However, the MTA Reform and Traffic Mobility Act provides a tax credit for those individuals whose primary residence is within the Central Business District and whose New York adjusted gross income is less than $60,000 per year. Preliminary analysis has found that fewer than 1% of the Manhattan CBD's commuters are low-income individuals who drive, but nonetheless, we are assessing the economic effects of the additional costs for these commuters. Finally, in terms of tolls on the taxier for hire vehicle industry, which has a high proportion of workers who identify as minority, as defined by United States Department of Transportation guidance, industry data shows that a high percentage of taxi and for hire vehicle drivers identify as minority populations. Once there is a new toll for entering the Manhattan Central Business District, our model shows that some passengers would no longer choose to use taxis and for hire vehicles, since it would increase the cost of their trip. We will examine the effect of the project on the taxi and for hire vehicle industry and the resultant effect on minority drivers. With respect to benefits, if the program is approved, we anticipate the project would reduce vehicular traffic in and near the Manhattan Central Business District. Overall, and depending upon scenario, our modeling predicts a 15 to 20% reduction in traffic volumes that would enter the Manhattan Central Business District each day. As a result, we anticipate improvements in air quality and traffic noise as there would be fewer vehicles. And we anticipate improvements in travel times within the Manhattan Central Business District as there would be less congestion. The program would also provide additional funds for subways, trains, and buses, funding the MTA Capital Program, which includes many projects to improve and expand subway, bus, and commuter rail service. This would benefit MTA's transit commuters, including environmental justice populations. As we mentioned in the previous slide, about 95% of low-income commuters use transit to reach the Manhattan Central Business District. I want to take just a moment to discuss or describe the anticipated NEPA schedule. We've already begun our outreach. That's what we're doing here today. And we anticipate that this outreach will continue through January of 2022, as we also prepare the NEPA environmental assessment. Between February 2022 and May 2022, there will be review with Federal Highway Administration of the document itself. And at the end of that period, the environmental assessment will be made available for public comment. Once the document is made available for public comment, there will be a public review period and a new comment period. That period will also include additional outreach related to toll rate ranges. Between that June 2022 date and December 2022, the work will be done to incorporate all of that information to make sure that the final outreach is done, and ultimately to have Federal Highway Administration make an environmental determination. If approved by Federal Highway Administration, future outreach and public hearings will be held as part of the Implementation and Traffic Mobility Review Board process during 2023. Here is the list of all the public outreach webinars we are holding. As had been noted in the distribution materials prior, you may attend any one of these or all of these as you would like. We also have the 3 environmental justice outreach webinars. Those will be occurring on October 7th, 12th, and 13th with slightly different focus areas. But again, as with the public outreach meetings, residents may attend any one of the webinars they would like to. In terms of our stakeholder working group meetings, we expect the first one in early November, the second one in late November, and then we expect a third one in June of 2022 once the environmental assessment has been released for public review. Thank you.
We will now move to the public comment portion of today's webinar. We encourage anyone joining via Zoom or live stream to take a short survey using the QR code or link currently being displayed. The link can also be found in the Q&A section of the Zoom. We are gathering public comments today to inform the environmental review process. Comments will be reflected in the environmental assessment once it is made public. Rather than responding to comments as they are given, we will do our best to address specific questions whenever possible in the Q&A chat function. However, please understand that at this phase of the process, Your question may be one that cannot be answered meaningfully until completion of the modeling and analysis. Anyone who joined the Zoom may also use the Q&A function throughout today's webinar to ask questions or provide comments. Please note that each speaker is limited to 2 minutes. We ask that speakers keep their remarks to the 2-minute time frame out of respect for all other speakers. We will be calling speakers who live in the geographic area that is the focus of today's webinar first, in the order they signed up, but everyone who signed up will be called to speak today. If you've joined the Zoom under a name that is different from the one you used when you signed up to speak, please identify yourself in the Q&A function with the name you used when you signed up. When you are called on to speak, there will be a brief transition on your screen. Please make sure that once your screen updates, your camera and microphone are enabled before beginning your remarks. You will not be able to unmute or enable your camera until it is your turn to speak. Please remain patient until then. In the event you miss your name being called, we will call the list one more time after all speakers in attendance have been called a first time. As a reminder, this webinar is being live casted and recorded and will be available publicly on our YouTube channel and our project website. By attending this virtual webinar, you are consenting to be recorded. We will now begin the public comment portion of today's webinar. Our first speaker is Trevor Holland, followed by Frank Avila Goldman.
Hi, thank you for having me. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I'm the president of the Two Bridges Tower Resident Association located in the environmental justice area of Two Bridges. We also have the FDR, which runs through the entire neighborhood of Two Bridges. You might think we categorically support this regressive tax, but the impact to our neighborhood will be felt disproportionately, especially for folks who live in this tax zone. This tax is not really about reducing traffic, it's really about raising money through a tax system. The data that I looked at, which I'm sure has been updated, showed that the majority of drivers who come into Manhattan are actually city and government workers. You want to reduce that traffic, take away all government placards, parking exemption, toll passes, and subsidized parking. We all know that's not going to happen. Okay, so why will this regressive tax have an impact on neighborhoods like mine? We'll take this example. I drive 2 senior relatives to doctor's appointments from Williamsburg to Manhattan twice a month. They are wheelchair bound and need assistance for the entire trip. How much will that trip now cost if I am the driver? Yes, they are low income, but they cannot drive themselves. We haven't even discussed how much the pricing will be, or the increase in price will be on the already overpriced goods and services in my neighborhood. You want to really do something with the money that's supposed to be raised for this? Look at the impact of all the traffic that will have on the FDR that runs through our neighborhood. You're shoving all that traffic there and not providing a way for people to get out without paying the tax. No exemptions for city or government workers, and the impact exemptions for people who live in these zones like they do in Staten Island and other parts of the country. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Frank Avila Goldman, followed by Valentina Jones.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. I'm trying to put on my video, but I guess it's not working. My name is Frank Avila Goldman, and I live on the waterfront of the Lower East Side in Gouverneur Gardens, an affordable housing development. I applaud the city's efforts to try and mitigate the enormous volume of cars that enter into my district as I live and dwell between the Williamsburg, Manhattan, and Brooklyn bridges. And because I live on the waterfront, I face the FDR. Aside from the nonstop volume of noise, the main reason why I can't open my windows is because of all the soot that coats my walls only after a few days. According to New York City's Community Health Profiles 2018 report, in the LES, the Child Asthma Emergency Department visit rate is 297 per 10,000. As a comparison, the rate for our neighbors in the wealthier financial district is 28 per 10,000. In any case, down here, you'll find a large low-income district, mainly populated with Black, Brown, and Asian folks, with a large senior population many of who are on fixed incomes and affordable subsidized housing and don't have other places in the city to live. But we do have families elsewhere. We do like to enjoy other largely inaccessible parts of the city, and we often require livery services to get around. Because I live on the waterfront, my access to public transit is limited, what they call transportation desert. If I wanted to go to the nearest major subway station, Essex Delancey, it's almost a mile walk with a good portion of it on an incline. There is bus service. The M14 SBS is a godsend. However, the bus stop closest to my development was removed for one further uphill. And most buses are not going to wait for us to run up that hill. Then there's the M22, which has largely undergone service cuts lately. To add insult to injury, the M22 can't finish their route due to the enormous congestion for cars going into New Jersey via the Holland Tunnel. So this is the LES waterfront, a disenfranchised neighborhood that gets screwed every which way. An increase for folks who have been poorly served with transportation, who still continue to struggle to breathe with the exempted FDR, are now being told they have to dig deeper into their pockets just to make up for the city's lack of care. While I support this overdue measure, I urge you to consider additional carve-out for those living in affordable subsidized housing in the Lower East Side. Zip codes 10002, 10009, 10038. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Valentina Jones, followed by Sonia Chung.
Hi, my name is Valentina Jones. I'm here on behalf of the Lower East Side Power Partnership. We advocate for exemptions for vehicles delivering to residents in ZIP 10002. From the southern tip, Knickerbocker Village, to the northern tip, Baruch houses, many residential developments in ZIP 10002 are identified as being part of environmental justice communities, as per the Mayor's Office of Climate and Sustainability. There are also several naturally occurring retirement communities, NORCs, in ZIP 10002. ZIP 10002 has many residential developments near the waterfront. ZIP 10002 is not a business district. LESPP understands that many residents became fearful of indoor shopping due to COVID-19 and now have many necessary items delivered, including those relating to medicine and general healthcare needs. Residents with mobility issues, including those who use walkers, wheelchairs, and scooters, have items shipped for convenience. LESPP is concerned that any tolls delivery vehicles pay will likely be transferred to a largely low-income, minority, and senior-based population, the residents of ZIP 10002, via increased delivery or shipping prices for items delivered. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Sonia Chung, followed by Zoya Kachadurian.
Hello. Yes. Hello, good evening. My name is Sonia Chung. I am a staff attorney in the Environmental Justice Program at NILPI, New York Lawyers for the Public Interest. NILPI is a community-driven civil rights organization, and our environmental justice program partners with communities to fight against environmental racism through campaigns such as our Renewable Rikers campaign, where we're pushing to transform Rikers Island into green infrastructure that will benefit those who've been harmed by the penal colony. NILPI fully supports congestion pricing because of the myriad benefits for environmental justice communities. However, while passage of the law itself is a key step, the way congestion pricing is implemented will prove critical to ensuring the distribution of intended benefits in a way that does not perpetuate existing burdens to environmental justice communities. First, the anticipated reduction of emissions is a crucial benefit to environmental justice communities, as they have already borne a disproportionate burden of legacy pollution and related health harms. Further, the emissions reductions would be in line with the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, CLCPA's goal to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The CLCPA, as well as local laws 60 and 64, respectively, demonstrate a statewide and city commitment to prioritizing environmental justice. The Central Business District Tolling Program should follow suit by centering environmental justice concerns in planning its implementation. Improvements to public transit made from congestion pricing revenue must serve as a direct benefit to environmental justice communities who largely rely on public transportation to get to the city. That said, improvements to public transit should be implemented in a manner that does not lead to displacement of environmental justice community members due to gentrification. Reducing traffic congestion would also be a step in the right direction for improving transit options for persons with disabilities. Exemptions to congestion pricings, however, must be clarified and implemented in a way that does not further disadvantage people with disabilities in accessing transit. To this end, we support Central Business District tolling program as long as its
Please
implementation
conclude your remarks.
is aligned with environmental justice priorities. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Zoya Kachajurian, followed by Christopher Hayward.
Hello, my name is Zoya Kachadurian. I represent people on the Upper West Side in the 10025 district. Upper West Siders, many of whom are rent stabilized or in public housing, have cars and use them primarily on the weekends to see family or to buy less expensive groceries elsewhere. Our concern is that people will flood the Upper West Side, driving in on the George Washington Bridge and parking on the Upper West Side to avoid the costs. Some of us in the winter will garage our cars midtown, which would require us to drive through. What are the provisions that are going to be made for these floods of people? Is there going to be parking stickers for those who live on the Upper West Side? We are already having a problem because of the concentration of very, very tall buildings being added, many of whom have cars and no garages put into these new buildings. In addition, driving around on the Upper West Side to find the ever-shrinking street parking only shifts the pollution from one area of Manhattan. Many people who suffer from asthma, and polluting the Upper West Side of Midtown is only swapping the problem. Additionally, all of the public transportation, nothing can be done to expand it as 60 to 70 floors of people are being brought into our community. Please consider the impact on the Upper West Side when you strategize and come up with the final plans for this program. It is an important program, but I think it has not been well thought out up till now. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Christopher Hayward, followed by Anuranjan Pegu.
Hello?
We can hear you.
Hello, yes. Can you hear me?
You may begin your remarks.
Thank you. My name is Chris Hayward. Thanks for the opportunity to speak. So, due in part to the terrible legacy of Robert Moses, environmental justice communities are disproportionately harmed by congestion on highways and major streets that cut through their neighborhoods. Due to congestion, they suffer greater negative health consequences such as asthma from pollutants spewed by vehicles, noise pollution, and pedestrian and cyclist deaths due to drivers. The vast majority of low-income New Yorkers rely on public transportation rather than cars to commute to and from their workplaces. They will thus disproportionately benefit from enhanced public transport that will occur as a result of the congestion pricing program tolls. In particular, it is necessary to address transit deserts, especially in the outer boroughs. One cheap, quick way to do this is by adding bus lanes with express bus service to make up for gaps in the current system. The current congestion pricing plan does not go far enough, however. Those who live and work in the CBD, who are, of course, tend to be wealthier than residents across the city, will benefit from reduced congestion. But those in Manhattan outside the CBD and in the outer boroughs will still suffer from congestion, perhaps even enhanced congestion in some places due to drivers avoiding tolls. For this reason, the zone should be extended to encompass the 5 boroughs, perhaps with a tiered system of charges where it's highest in the CBD, but still congestion pricing charge to enter into, say, Brooklyn from the suburbs. Finally, I recommend following the examples of some cities where pricing depends on vehicle weight so that wealthy SUV drivers pay more than those who are lower income residents driving small sedans, for example. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Anuranjan Pegu, followed by Elba Salamanca. Anuranjan?
Yes. Hi.
You may begin your remarks.
Okay. My name is Anuranjan Pegu. I work in an environmental nonprofit, and I live in South Brooklyn and identify as a part of a minority population. I support congestion pricing as an idea, but the problem with this specific programs that is written, promoted, influenced by wealthy, privileged people and groups who are maybe living in Tribeca and working in the financial district, and then think everyone can just walk and bike to work, ignorant of ground realities in our other boroughs. People like me are taking multiple transfers. We're adding 30 minutes to a commute so that we don't get late to where we're going, which is extremely stressful and takes way too much time out of our daily lives. I work in downtown Manhattan, which is 9 miles away from home. Transit times is supposed to be 45 minutes, but usually takes 60 to 75. Cycling takes about 90, but I found the perfect solution. It's a motorcycle. My commute is down to 30 minutes, which means that I've literally cut about 90 minutes every day. My yearly cost on gas, insurance, and maintenance is cheaper than riding the subway. Now I can get groceries wherever. I can meet friends and family. I don't have to stress about getting late to work because I was stuck underground due to a train delay. All the cities that have congestion pricing currently exempt motorcycles from the toll for this very reason. Motorcycles are a working class machine everywhere. They're cheaper to buy, they're cheaper to run, they're easier to park, and give people the mobility that is far more practical, flexible, and accessible than public transit or cycling in New York can ever be. It sort of equalizes the access that minority and low income groups have to the city. There are also vast gaps in transit in the boroughs, and motorcycles are an affordable way to bridge that gap for more people now. If the MTA is sincere about making transportation equal, the least that they can do is give 100% exemption to motorcycles like the other cities do. It's proven to reduce congestion and pollution and will also serve the lower income and minority populations who tend to ride motorcycles more. It is illogical and the right thing to do now. It is literally the bare minimum. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker will be Ginny Hennenberg, followed by Ronald Sullivan.
Yes, good evening. I'm Jenny Hennenberg. I'm disabled. I live within the CBD. I have a private vehicle and it has a New York City disability parking permit. I want to be sure that when you consider vehicles, that you consider private vehicles that have New York City disability parking permits. And I would also like to address the parking situation between the expansion of bike lanes, bus lanes, and outdoor dining. When I have to go to a doctor's appointment now, which is the primary use of my car, it's almost impossible to find a parking space. I would like some disability parking, particularly around the areas of hospitals like other cities do. We have nowhere that provides for disability parking spaces, even though I have a permit. It takes me sometimes an hour to an hour and a half to find a spot. So I would like, I live within the district. I would like to be sure that some consideration is given to those of us who are disabled for both getting exempt from any of the tolls, as well as some consideration for parking. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Ronald Sullivan, followed by Tricia Lead.
Good evening. Thank you again for giving me an opportunity to speak this evening. My name is Ron Sullivan. I'm the pastor of Christian Parish for Spiritual Renewal, a church in Harlem. I have church members and family members who live in the CBD who are going to be adversely affected by this new toll system that's being implemented. My children's grandparents are going to have to pay every time they want to see their family. The MTA, which is in need of improvement, I don't think it's fair to ask people who aren't using it to be the ones to pay for the improvement. I also believe that the money that's being raised should definitely fall into the hands of the MTA improvements and not into the hands of upper management for the MTA. We want to make sure that the money is being used for what it's intended to be used for. But when people mention the environment, reducing cars, like taking my car off the road, means that when I shop for my family, I'm going to have to now have it delivered. So we're going to decrease car traffic, but increase truck traffic, which I don't think is going to fill the environmental outcomes that people are looking for. I also feel that dividing a community right through the center, separating Upper Manhattan from Midtown Manhattan, socially creates a lot of negative impact for those communities who are now being considered or looked at as, you've got to now pay to enter into the golden zone because you don't deserve to be here. I think that this plan has not taken into consideration families, has not taken into consideration seniors, it has not taken into consideration people who've lived in the city their entire lives. Everyone under 60th Street is not wealthy. Everyone under 60th Street does not have a beautiful big SUV. People have been living here their entire lives, trying to live their lives, and now they're going to have to be taxed for seeing their families and going to church and leading normal lives like everybody else. It's unfair, and I know it's going forward, but I just had to express and represent that this is not a good thing for everybody in New York. It's for some and not all.
Thank you. Our next speakers are Tricia Lead, followed by Renee Reynolds. If you are signed up to speak but have not heard your name called, please indicate this in the Q&A function. Our next speaker is Tricia Lead.
God's Love We Deliver is New York City's leading non-for-profit provider of medically tailored meals and nutrition counseling for people living with life-threatening illnesses. We are dedicated to cooking and delivering the specific nutritious meals that people with severe illness so urgently require. We also support families by providing meals for the children and caregivers of our clients. All our services are free of charge to clients, we are proud that in our 36-year history, we never had a waiting list. Our kitchen is home-based in Soho, Manhattan. Every weekday, without fail, our refrigerated meal delivery vans leave the central business district to deliver 2.4 million life-saving meals to 9,000 clients annually outside this area. Countless harmful health outcomes find their root in lack of access to good nutrition, which is predicated on racial, economic, and healthcare inequities. God Love serves those living with serious and chronic illnesses, an epidemic that has disproportionately impacted our populations of color, and many of our clients live at or below the federal poverty level. Our experience of this service has shown us deep disparities in our communities and demonstrates that good nutrition is part of the solution. I come before you to request an exemption from the tolling program of our refrigerated delivery vans. Modeling rates on previous congestion proposals, this program has the potential to cost God's Love up to $500,000 annually, having outsized effect on the environmental justice populations that we serve. While we support the environment and equity goals of the tolling program, these gains cannot be made at the expense of the most vulnerable and isolated in our communities. Thank you for your time and your consideration.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Renee Reynolds. If you are signed up to speak but have not heard your name called, please indicate this in the Q&A function. Thank you. Our next speaker is Renee Reynolds. Renee?
I can't see my video yet.
We can see you.
Okay, great. Good afternoon or good evening. My name is Renee Reynolds, and I'm the Executive Director of the Tri-State Transportation Campaign, an advocacy and policy organization fighting for sustainable mobility in New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. TSTC strongly supports the implementation of congestion pricing. We understand that congestion pricing is not simply about the tolling system, but about the toll that traffic congestion and air pollution exacts on the livability of our city and the health and well-being of our most vulnerable communities. Environmental justice communities in New York City are at the front line of the climate crisis. In recent weeks and months, we have experienced torrential downpours and flash flooding that has left commuters stranded and precious lives lost. We must act now to reduce carbon emissions from the transportation sector, and this starts with the implementation of congestion pricing. Not only is this a win for the environment and public health, it's also a win for millions of transit riders who rely on a transit system that needs critical funding to improve its resilience to climate change. Within the counties that make up the project study area, 52% of residents are people of color. and 13% of the residents have household incomes below the poverty line. The vast majority of the commuters into the CBD reach their destination by public transit, and low-income people represent the largest share of public transit riders in New York City. While congestion pricing by itself won't solve every transportation problem, it is an integral part of a larger strategy to make our transportation more efficient, sustainable, and equitable. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you all for joining us this evening. For those who did not do so already, we encourage you to take our short survey via the QR code or link currently being displayed. The link can also be found in the Q&A section of the Zoom. For details about upcoming environmental justice webinars, please visit the project website at new.mta.info/project/CBDTP or call the public meeting hotline at 646-252-6777. Information about how to join or suggest someone else for the Environmental Justice Stakeholder Working Group can also be found on the project website. As a final reminder, in addition to the virtual public webinars, there are several other ways you can provide comments, ask questions, or make requests. We encourage the public to comment via the CBDTP website, new.mta.info/project/CBDTP. You may also email comments to cbdtp@mtabt.org, send them via mail to CBD Tolling Program, 2 Broadway, 23rd floor, New York, New York, 10004, or call 646-252-7440. The time is currently 6:52 p.m. This concludes our webinar. Thank you again for your participation.